She called the cops and screamed, "Arrest him right now!" I was standing barefoot on my own lawn when Karen waved her arms like she owned the whole block. Behind her, at least 20 HOA members were marching straight across my grass, boots pressing deep into the soil I had just seeded 2 weeks ago. One of them even stepped over the small wooden sign that clearly said, "Private property." I didn't shout. I didn't move. Karen walked up close, phone in my face. "This path is community access." "You can't block it," she snapped. Her sunglasses were too big for her face, but her attitude was bigger. "Remove those little stakes today, or I'll have you fined." I looked behind her. They were using my yard as a shortcut to the lake every Saturday, like I didn't exist, like my land was public park space. "My property line ends at the lake," I said calmly. She laughed loud so everyone could hear. "Sweetie, the HOA map says otherwise." That word, sweetie. My 8-year-old son was standing on the porch holding his toy truck, watching strangers step over his soccer goal like it was trash. One man kicked it aside without even looking. My son looked at me and whispered, "Dad, why are they walking on our grass?" Karen heard that. She leaned toward him and said, "Because your daddy doesn't understand rules." Something in my chest tightened. 2 police cars rolled in slow. She had actually called them. One officer stepped out and asked, "What's going on?" Karen jumped in fast. "He's obstructing HOA community access. We have rights to cross here." I turned and pointed at the wooden stakes I had placed that morning. "Officer, this is my deeded land." Karen smiled like she had already won. "Show him the fake paper," she said to the crowd. One of her board members held up a printed HOA map with a bright yellow line, drawn straight through my yard. The officer looked at it, then looked at me. "You blocking a legal easement?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "No, sir. I'm protecting my son's yard." Karen stepped closer and lowered her voice. "If you don't remove those stakes, I'll fine you daily. And I'll have that truck towed for illegal parking, too." I glanced at my old pickup in the driveway. The same truck I drove overseas 15 years ago. The same truck with a small, faded veteran sticker on the back. Window. She didn't notice that. She didn't notice a lot of things. One officer walked the yard quietly, measuring steps. He looked confused. "Ma'am, this doesn't look like an official easement." Karen crossed her arms. "It's been used for years. That makes it community property." I almost smiled at that. "Used for years doesn't make it yours," I said calmly. "It just means I was being patient." The officer asked for my deed. I walked inside without rushing. Karen shouted behind me, "He's stalling!" But when I came back out, I wasn't holding just the deed, I was holding a county survey report, stamped last month, and Karen had no idea what that stamp meant yet. I handed it to the officer and said one simple line that made her smile fade. "I didn't fight for this country to be told I can't stand on my own land." The officer took the survey paper and studied it quietly. Karen kept talking the whole time. "That's outdated. The HOA map is what matters here." Her voice was loud, confident. But I saw her fingers shaking just a little. The officer looked up. "This survey is county approved, signed and sealed." Karen didn't back down. She stepped closer. "Our community has used this path for 15 years. Continuous use creates access rights." Some neighbors nodded like they had heard that before. For a second, I felt that pressure. All those eyes on me. Like I was the problem. Like I had just moved in yesterday and was trying to change everything. Then the officer asked, me quietly, "Did you ever give written permission for public access?" "No, sir." Karen jumped in. "He didn't stop us either." I looked straight at her. Being polite isn't the same as giving ownership. The officer exhaled slowly. "Ma'am, without a recorded easement, this remains private property." That should have ended it, but real life doesn't end that. Clean. Karen pulled out another paper from her folder. "Fine. Then we'll file for prescriptive easement. And until that's settled, we'll continue to use the path." Some of the crowd started murmuring. One man whispered, "We've always walked through here like it was a tradition." My son picked up his crushed soccer goal and held it to his chest. That hit harder than Karen's words. The officer turned to the group. "If you continue crossing after being told it's private, it could be considered trespassing." The crowd shifted. Some stepped back, but Karen didn't. She pointed at my driveway. And that truck is over the sidewalk line. That's a violation. I'm calling a tow company. My stomach dropped for a second. She really would do it. And the crazy part? The sidewalk rule was real. Within 20 minutes, a tow truck actually turned onto the street, ups and downs. Neighbors were whispering. Some filming, some avoiding eye contact. The tow driver stepped out and asked, "Which vehicle?" Karen pointed proudly at mine. "That one." I walked down calmly and said, "Sir, before you hook it, you may want to look at the plate." He bent down slightly. His eyes changed. "You active?" "Retired," I said. He stood up straight. "I'm not towing that truck over 2 inches." Karen snapped, "You don't get to decide that." The tow driver looked at her and said something simple. "Ma'am, I decide what I hook." He drove off. For a moment, I thought maybe things would calm down. But then, Karen did something that surprised even me. She turned to the officer and said, "He threatened the community. He said he'd make sure none of us step on his land again." The officer looked at me. "Did you say that?" I stayed quiet for half a second. Choosing my words carefully, I said, "I'll protect what belongs to my family." Karen smirked. "See? Aggressive." The officer didn't smile back. He looked at her instead. Protecting property isn't aggression. And that's when I saw it. Doubt spreading through the crowd. But Karen wasn't done. She leaned closer to the officer and whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but I saw his eyebrows rise slightly. He walked back toward me. "Sir, she says you installed those stakes without HOA approval." I nodded. "Correct. And you're aware they can fine you for exterior modifications?" There it was. Another low blow. Real life isn't one big win. It's pressure from every side. I looked at Karen. She looked certain again. Like she had found a new weapon. I took a slow breath. "Officer, those aren't decorations." He glanced at the wooden stakes again. "They're marking the hedge line." Karen laughed loudly. "He doesn't even have a hedge!" I met her eyes calmly. "Not yet." Karen's laugh echoed across the street. "Not yet?" she repeated like I had just admitted defeat. "You can't plant a hedge there without board approval. It will block community access." I didn't answer her. I pulled out my phone instead. The officer watched closely. The neighbors leaned in. Even my son stopped moving. I opened the county zoning page and turned the screen toward the officer. "Sir, this property is zoned residential agricultural. Privacy hedges under 6 feet don't require HOA approval if they're inside the legal boundary." Karen's smile started to fade. "That's not what our rules say." I nodded slowly. "Your rules don't override county zoning." The officer looked at the survey again, then at the wooden stakes. He stepped off the distance from the property line to the lake, matching it with the stamped measurements. It lined up perfectly. Karen's voice got sharper. "He's trying to block the neighborhood from the lake. That's selfish." I finally looked straight at the crowd. "The lake has a public entrance 2 streets over." Murmurs spread. A few neighbors looked at each other. They knew that entrance. They just didn't like walking the extra 5 minutes. Karen snapped, "That entrance is inconvenient." And that was it. The officer lowered the papers and said, calm but firm, "Ma'am, inconvenience does not create ownership." You could feel the shift in the air. But Karen wasn't finished embarrassing herself. She pointed at the stakes again. "Remove them now or I'll personally tear them out." The officer's tone changed instantly. "Ma'am, if you touch those markers after being warned, that's criminal trespass." Silence. For the first time, Karen looked unsure. Then her husband, who had been quiet the whole time, stepped forward and whispered something in her ear. I saw his face, pale. She pulled away from him. "No, he's bluffing." I reached into my folder again. "I'm not bluffing." This time, I handed the officer a second paper. A recorded notice of intent to install a permanent privacy hedge, filed 2 weeks ago, stamped. "Approved." Karen blinked. "That's impossible." I shook my head slowly. "You were so busy marching across my lawn. You didn't check the county records." The officer handed the paper back to me. "Everything here is legal." Karen's voice cracked just a little. "So he just gets to shut us out?" I looked at her calmly. "You shut yourselves out the day you decided my yard was yours." The crowd began stepping back. Phones were still recording, but now they weren't pointed at me. The officer turned to Karen one last time. If anyone crosses this property again without permission, it will be documented as trespassing. Is that understood? No one answered her. No one stood beside her. And as the police cars pulled away, the same neighbors who had marched across my lawn slowly walked around it instead, like they suddenly remembered how sidewalks work. Karen stood there alone, staring at the stakes that would soon become a wall of green. And that's when I said the one line she'll never forget. You thought it was just grass. But it was always a boundary. The next morning, trucks pulled up early. Not police this time. Landscaping crews. Long rows of fresh green shrubs lined my driveway, stacked neatly like quiet soldiers waiting for orders. Karen's curtains moved across the street. She was watching. By noon, the first line of the hedge was in the ground. Clean, straight, legal. Some neighbors slowed their cars as they passed. No one marched across my lawn anymore. They used the sidewalk, just like they always could have. In the afternoon, something unexpected happened. An older neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, walked up slowly from the sidewalk. He didn't step on the grass. He kept his hands behind his back like a man who knew he had been wrong. I guess we got used to cutting through, he said softly. Didn't think about your boy playing out here? I nodded. It's okay. He looked at the hedge and then at me. You handled that the right way. That meant more than the argument ever did. Later that evening, my son ran along the fresh dirt line, excited. It's like we're building our own fort, he said, smiling wide. I laughed for the first time in days. A week passed. The hedge grew fuller, thick enough to block the view, tall enough to make a statement, but still within the law. Then one more twist came. The HOA board sent a notice to the whole neighborhood. Not to find me, not to threaten me. They updated the community map, removing the fake path through my yard. Karen's name was no longer listed as HOA president. No announcement. No speech, just gone. I didn't celebrate. I didn't brag. One evening, as the sun dropped over the lake, I stood behind the new hedge with my son. We could still hear laughter from the public entrance down the street, people enjoying the water the right way. My son looked up at me and asked, "Are they mad at us?" I shook my head. "No, buddy. They just learned something." "What?" I looked at the green wall protecting our yard, the grass growing back where boots once pressed it down. That respect is cheaper than conflict. He smiled and kicked his soccer ball across the lawn. Our lawn, without anyone stepping over it. And for the first time since we moved in, the yard felt quiet, safe, ours. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud. It's planting something that grows,